As a Boise State Public Radio listener, we're inviting you to share your opinions about technology in our annual survey about how you use the radio, social media, smartphones, tablets, streaming, and the web to stay connected. We hope you'll find it to be an interesting way to reflect on your own changing habits. Please take a few moments to participate, and thanks for helping Boise State Public Radio plan for the future. Take the survey now at boisestatepublicradio.org.
More Idaho Matters now from the studios of Boise State Public Radio News. I'm Gemma Gaudet. The countercultural movement of the late 1960s has long been remembered for its season of music, rebellion, and social change. However, it's also known for its personal stories, which is exactly what author Kerri Maher is exploring in her latest novel, Summer of Love. Following 3 generations of women, Maher explores how the hopes and struggles of one defining era can leave a mark on the lives we lead and the stories we pass down. Our associate producer, Hannah Gardowski, sat down with Maher to talk about her new release. So let's take a listen.
For those who have yet to pick up your novel, can you tell us a bit more about this story?
Yeah, well, the description you read was great. I would add that, it's dual timeline. One of the characters is named Dawn, and she is the star of the 2015 storyline. And she is the daughter of Miranda, who is one of the stars of the previous storyline, the other storyline, I should say, which starts with the 1967 Summer of Love in San Francisco, in everything, the glory that it's famous for, the hippies, the concerts, the Haight-Ashbury, the war protests, all of that great stuff. And Miranda has a sister named Winnie. And Winnie is an aspiring poet. She lives in San Francisco. She's just graduated from UC Berkeley, and she couldn't be more different from her sister Miranda. Miranda is devoted to running the family vineyard up in Napa. And, this is a really exciting time for the California wine country. It hadn't yet come into its own. So Miranda's quest to make a California wine that rivals French wine is really quite a big deal and true to the history of this time.
So your book, as we were just talking about, explores kind of both the idealism of the 1967 Summer of Love and the realities that followed. What drew you to that particular moment in American history?
Well, my parents met at UC Berkeley in the 1960s. So they were not, I would say activists or hippies, but they, this whole moment was surrounding them, and they really were a part of it in the way that everyone in this geographical area sort of had to be a part of it. And so I grew up hearing stories about this amazing time and place. It was almost like I had lived through it myself. And it wasn't just my parents. Like my parents are California natives. My extended family is all from on both sides are both California natives. And so I heard all kinds of stories from everyone in the family about this period. And then I went to UC Berkeley in the 1990s, and the 60s was still very much alive in the 90s on the Berkeley campus. There were, peace signs and invitations to protests and resistance posters, really all over the place. It took that history very seriously. So I've wanted to write a California novel for a long time. I've wanted to set at least part of it in the 60s. It just took me a long time to figure out how to do it.
Now, the Hartley women each have, feels like, very different dreams and definitions of success. How did you approach creating 3 distinct female voices?
I'm so glad that it reads that way. There's a sort of a point for every writer, well, at least for me, and many writers that I know, where you just can't see the book anymore. But I would say that the distinction between the 3 voices really evolved over time. I'm very much a writer who does a lot of revising. And so there was a lot of refining, there was a lot of discovering really and digging deep on who each character really was. I do a lot of meta writing, which is, sort of writing about the writing. I write little biographies of my characters.
I love that.
Yeah. And they, and even that, the biographies that I write before I start the book sometimes are not do not wind up being the actual truth about the character. Like the biographies sometimes get adjusted as I get to know the character in the process of writing the drafts. Um, so that sort of is a process question, you know. That's it just happens over a period of writing and rewriting for me.
Mm. Now, I've heard that you've described Summer of Love as your most personal novel yet. What made this story feel different from the books you've written before?
So this book is different in a number of ways. I've already talked about my personal connection to the history, right? The
Hmm.
60s and later California history. So there's that. You know, this is also my first published novel in which all the characters are entirely fictional. They're not even loosely based on real people. My first three novels were about real people. You know, one of them was about Grace Kelly, another one was about one of the Kennedy children. The most recent one was All You Have to Do Is Call, which was loosely based on a real group of women in Chicago. Um, and and this one, what makes it historical fiction is that there's this 1967 storyline in it. And the other thing that makes it different from my other books is that my ideas for the first four historical novels that I wrote all came to me. You know, for instance, the one All You Have to Do Is Call, which is loosely based on the Jane Collective. I got that idea from hearing an NPR news story about the real Jane Collective.
Hmm.
I got the idea for the Kennedy debutante by watching a documentary about Chatsworth House. You know, so those ideas like came to me, whereas Summer of Love really came from me. I, you know, I had turned in my last book and I was kind of thinking about what I wanted to write about next. And honestly, I was a little stuck. And like there weren't any real people that I was dying to write about or even loosely based write about. And a good friend of mine said, you know, Kerri, you should really do the artist's way. I think if you do the artist's way, you'll figure it out. And I had been avoiding the artist's way for years. For listeners who don't know what it is, the artist's way is a book that's been around for decades by Julia Cameron. It's a creativity course in a book, and it's 12 weeks long. And I knew that the foundation of the artist's way were these things called morning pages, which is a journaling practice that you do basically first thing in the morning. And I really am not a journaler at all. And so I didn't want to do this, but I was kind of desperate. So I was like, well, I'll try anything now. It turned out I loved the morning pages. Um, you know, I dutifully got up and I did them every morning. I did them like lying in bed. For the first few weeks, my hand and wrist really hurt because I had not used those muscles in a very long time.
Mhm.
But I will tell you, it worked because, you know, I did the other exercises that Julia Cameron puts forth for people in her book. But within 4 to 6 weeks, I had the whole idea for Summer of Love. I think really because I did the artist's way. So, yeah, so that's the very long-winded answer to your question about how did this book come about.
No, I love that answer. Okay, so your novel also explores addiction and recovery with, I think, a great deal of kind of compassion and nuance rather than focusing on one defining moment. You show recovery as an ongoing journey. Why was that important for you to portray, and what went into maybe your research in portraying that?
Yeah, well, so actually, this is the other part of the reason why this is such a personal book for me. So I am, as we speak now, 4.5 years sober myself, and so I've had this a kind of long-ish recovery journey that actually even predates that 4.5 years. So when I sat down to start writing this book, you know, I was maybe 2 years into that journey. I had had one previous alcohol-free stint. But then I went back to drinking for a little while and before I really quit at the end of 2021. Um, and it was almost like I couldn't not write about it. I think to some extent in my novels, I'm always writing about things that are on my mind or maybe I'm going through. And sometimes I don't even realize until after I've written the book what that thing was. But in this case, I knew that I wanted talk about and represent the recovery journey in a way that I hadn't seen it represented before. You know, in most movies and television shows and books that I have encountered about addiction and recovery, it's like there's this long, slow march to the moment when the person realizes, I need to get sober. I need to
Mm.
go into rehab. I need to go into a 12-step program, whatever. And like, that's the end. But actually, in my experience, that is just the beginning.
Mm.
And that is really what I wanted to show in this book. And I really wanted to show what happens on the other side of that choice, and how amazing and wonderful it is.
And I think you did a wonderful job of that. Now, your novel also examines, it feels like the tension between the stories families tell and the secrets they keep. What maybe interested you or fascinated you most about inherited family narratives?
Well, I think probably everyone listening, that everyone has inherited family narratives, right? I wasn't going to write about my own, but I'm keenly aware, and I think being in a recovery community, I don't go to 12-step meetings, but I do go to meetings of this other group called the Luckiest Club, which is TLC for short. It's a subscription community. It's absolutely terrific, and there are tons of meetings that you can go to. And, one of the things that I really felt like I tuned into were that everyone has these stories from their own families of origin that ripple back through previous generations. And that's important. I feel like this term intergenerational trauma has sort of really come into the fore in the last maybe 5 to 10 years. Um, and there was an extent to which I wanted to show that and dramatize that. Like, what does that actually look like? I don't reach too far back into the generations of the Hartley family, but I go back three. I think I show three generations pretty clearly.
Mm.
Um, I'm just interested in all of that. And, is this the like, definitive word on that subject? No, I feel like I'll be exploring family secrets and why do we tell the stories we tell and when we tell them and why we tell them. That's a career interest of mine.
I feel readers often connect with books because they recognize part of themselves in characters. Um, what conversations do you hope Summer of Love inspires after readers turn that final page?
Oh, so many, right? People who have encountered California, whether they've lived there or visited there or want to visit there, I hope that, people will talk about California as a place and, how did this representation of the state compare with what they have in their imagination or in their experience. And in terms of the addiction and recovery storyline, I was very steeped in what it was like to be the person in, struggling to quit the substance. But as my agent a number of times pointed out to me, she's like, listen, Kerri, readers that aren't struggling themselves, everyone knows someone who is a family member, a friend. Um, and I hope that reading this book will be a refreshing change of and a different way of looking at that experience, and might inspire people to talk about it and also normalize talking about it. Um, you know, my last book was about reproductive justice and abortion, and I talked a lot about in that book about even people who support abortion rights have spoken about it in hushed tones. And I think that that is less true now, which is great. And I think that that is becoming more and more true of, being sober or sober curious. We don't need to speak about this in hushed tones. We can be open about it. We can talk about why we decide to drink, not drink, you know, take a gummy, whatever the thing is. And we don't have to, something I also hope that the book shows is that you can stop drinking at any point. It doesn't have to be like a movie worthy rock bottom, as they say. There's all kinds of reasons why people drink and don't drink. So I hope that those conversations get opened up too.
And that was our associate producer, Hannah Gardosky, speaking with author Kerri Maher about her latest novel, Summer of Love, which is out on shelves right now. You've been listening to the Idaho Matters podcast from Boise State Public Radio. To stay in touch, you can find quick Idaho daily news every morning when you subscribe to the Connector podcast. And you can also listen to Boise State Public Radio podcasts, including Idaho Matters, on YouTube.
So you can't see this, but hopefully you can hear it. Behind every Boise State Public Radio podcast is a team working hard to bring you stories that matter. So if you value podcasts like this one, please support them. Hit donate at boisestatepublicradio.org. Thanks.